The phone call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning in late September. Daniel Carmel sat in his apartment in Damascus, holding a burner phone he'd purchased 3 days earlier from a street vendor near the Hamidiyah Souk. He dialed the emergency contact number he'd been given 7 years ago during his recruitment briefing in a hotel room overlooking the Mediterranean. The number connected to a switchboard somewhere in Tel Aviv, routing through encrypted servers in 3 countries before reaching a voice that answered with a single word in Hebrew: status. Daniel spoke quickly. His cover was compromised. Syrian intelligence had arrested one of his contacts. The network was collapsing. He needed extraction within 48 hours. The voice on the other end asked 3 verification questions. Daniel answered correctly. The voice told him to maintain normal routines and wait for instructions. The call lasted 92 seconds. When Daniel hung up, he noticed his hand was shaking. He made coffee and sat by the window watching traffic move through the streets below. Everything looked ordinary. That was the problem. Ordinary meant time was still passing. Ordinary meant he was still there. The call log registered in Mossad's operations center at 11:49 local time. A duty officer flagged it as priority level 3. Immediate attention required, but not crisis level. The file was transferred to the Syria desk, where an analyst named Rachel Barak opened Daniel's operational history. 7 years active, 43 intelligence reports, moderate value classification, no critical current operations dependent on his continued access. She made notes and forwarded the file to her supervisor with a recommendation. Evaluate for extraction pending risk assessment and resource availability. Daniel had been useful, but not irreplaceable. That assessment would determine everything that followed. This channel exists to document how intelligence operations actually work. If that's what you're here for, you'll want to be here regularly. Understanding how Daniel Carmel died requires understanding who he was and why his survival became negotiable. Born in Haifa in 1971, he grew up in a neighborhood where military service was assumed, where every family had sons in uniform and photos of the fallen hung in living rooms like warnings. His father sold textiles. His mother taught elementary school. Daniel excelled in languages. Speaking Arabic with a Syrian dialect, he'd perfected through months of immersion training after his recruitment. He wasn't brilliant, but he was disciplined. The kind of person who followed instructions precisely and never improvised unless absolutely necessary. Mossad recruited him during his mandatory military service. An officer noticed his language aptitude and psychological profile during routine evaluations. Calm under pressure, high tolerance for isolation, minimal emotional attachments. The profile of someone who could live a double life without fracturing. They approached him with the offer in 2004, presenting it as a patriotic duty and personal opportunity. Serve Israel from inside enemy territory. Gather intelligence that could save lives. He accepted after minimal deliberation, motivated less by ideology than by the appeal of purpose and the promise of significance his civilian life had failed to provide. The training lasted 18 months. He learned tradecraft, how to detect surveillance, how to communicate covertly, how to build and maintain a legend that would withstand scrutiny. They gave him a constructed identity. Daniel Manzour, a Syrian expatriate returning from years abroad with family connections in Damascus and business interests in textiles. The cover was solid because it relied on truth twisted slightly. His father's business provided real knowledge of the textile trade. His Arabic was native level. His family history included Syrian ancestry several generations back, enough to justify the story if anyone investigated. They inserted him into Damascus in early 2006 through a carefully orchestrated entry that involved legitimate business introductions and social networks cultivated over months. He rented an apartment in the Mossad district, established import connections, and slowly built relationships with people who had access to information Israel wanted. Mid-level government officials, military contractors, engineers working on infrastructure projects with security implications. He wasn't James Bond. He was a patient collector of incremental intelligence that, when aggregated with other sources, helped Israeli analysts build a clearer picture of Syrian capabilities and intentions. For 7 years, he sent reports, encrypted messages transmitted through dead drops and secure digital channels, information about military deployments near the Golan Heights, details on Syrian air defense systems, names of Iranian advisors operating in Damascus. The intelligence was valuable, but not transformative. Daniel contributed to the mosaic, but he wasn't the centerpiece. That distinction would matter when decisions were made about whether saving him justified the risks and costs of extraction. The request for extraction arrived at a complicated moment. Mossad Syria operations were under review following the exposure of another network several months earlier. Resources were stretched. Personnel were being reassigned. The appetite for risk in Damascus had diminished after operational failures that resulted in diplomatic embarrassment and internal recriminations. Daniel's request landed in an environment where caution had become the default posture and where every extraction proposal faced intense scrutiny. Rachel Barak's supervisor, a section chief named Yosef Klein, reviewed the file and Daniel's operational history. He noted the compromised contact and the potential threat, but also noted the absence of immediate confirmation that Syrian intelligence had connected the arrested contact to Daniel specifically. The threat was plausible, but not certain. Klein made a decision that would cascade through the following days. He requested a full risk assessment before authorizing extraction planning. The assessment would evaluate the likelihood that Daniel was actually compromised, the resources required for extraction, the probability of success, and the operational costs if the attempt failed. The request went to Mossad's assessment division. Analysts began reviewing all available intelligence on Syrian counterintelligence activities. They examined Daniel's recent communications for signs of surveillance. They cross-referenced the arrested contacts' known associations. The process was thorough, designed to prevent wasting resources on false alarms or rushing into operations that might expose other assets. But thoroughness required time. The assessment would take at least 72 hours to complete. Daniel had requested extraction within 48. On Wednesday morning, Daniel maintained his normal routine as instructed. He left his apartment at 8:15 and walked to his office, a small space above a carpet shop where he conducted his import business. He made phone calls. He reviewed invoices. He met with a client about a shipment of cotton fabric from Turkey. Every action performed with careful attention to appearing normal, while every minute felt like exposure. He checked his secure communication channel 3 times. No messages. By evening, anxiety had begun eroding his discipline. He considered leaving immediately, abandoning the apartment, and trying to reach the Lebanese border on his own. But his training overrode panic. Unauthorized action would compromise other operations and burn networks Mossad had spent years building. He had to wait. In Tel Aviv, the assessment was still being compiled. Analysts worked methodically, cross-referencing databases and reviewing intercepts. They found no direct evidence that Syrian intelligence had identified Daniel specifically. The arrested contact had been taken during a broader sweep targeting suspected opposition elements. There was a possibility the arrest was unrelated to intelligence activity. But possibility wasn't certainty. The analysts noted that absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. Syrian counterintelligence was sophisticated enough to conduct surveillance without leaving obvious traces. The assessment concluded with measured language. Threat cannot be confirmed or ruled out definitively. Recommend continued monitoring and preparation for potential extraction if threat escalates. The assessment reached Yosef Klein on Thursday afternoon. He reviewed it with frustration. The analysts hadn't provided the clear answer. He needed to either approve extraction or dismiss the request entirely. He faced a decision point. Authorize extraction based on unconfirmed threat, committing resources and accepting risks for an asset whose intelligence value was moderate, or maintain the status quo, continuing to monitor while avoiding premature action that might expose other operations. Clean requested a cost-benefit analysis. How much would extraction cost in terms of resources, personnel, and potential exposure? What was the strategic value of preserving Daniel as an asset versus accepting his loss? The request went to operations planning, where specialists began mapping extraction scenarios: overland route to Lebanon, maritime extraction from the coast, false documentation for commercial flight departure. Each option presented challenges. Syrian border security had intensified following regional conflicts. Mossad's networks in Damascus were already strained. The analysis concluded that successful extraction would require significant operational commitment, with moderate probability of success, and high probability of exposing other assets if the attempt failed. The cost-benefit analysis reached Clean on Friday. The conclusion was bureaucratic and bloodless. Extraction feasible, but not recommended given current operational environment and asset's intelligence value classification. Recommend monitoring situation and reassessing if threat confirmation received. Clean made his decision. He would not authorize immediate extraction. Instead, he instructed Daniel to reduce his profile, minimize contact with known associates, and prepare for possible self-extraction if the situation deteriorated further. The message reached Daniel through his secure channel on Friday evening. It contained no apology, no explanation of the decision-making process that had led to this conclusion. Just instructions delivered in the cold language of operational necessity. Daniel read the message 3 times, trying to interpret what it meant. They weren't coming for him. At least not yet. He was being told to wait longer, to maintain his cover while Mossad continued evaluating whether he was worth saving. The realization settled over him like a weight. He understood the calculation being made. His life was being measured against operational costs and strategic priorities, and the measurement wasn't coming out in his favor. This is the level of detail most public accounts never reach. That's the layer this channel focuses on. On Saturday, Syrian Mukhabarat officers arrived at the carpet shop below Daniel's office. They questioned the shop owner about his tenant. Who was Daniel Manzoor? How long had he rented the space? Who visited him? The shop owner answered honestly, knowing that evasion would only create suspicion. Daniel seemed like a normal businessman. Quiet, professional, paid rent on time. The officers took notes and left. The shop owner immediately called Daniel to warn him. Someone was asking questions. Daniel thanked him and hung up. He sat at his desk, staring at the phone, understanding that time had just run out. He sent an emergency signal through his secure channel. Syrian intelligence conducting active investigation. Immediate extraction critical. The signal reached Tel Aviv at 2:37 on Saturday afternoon. In Israel, Saturday is Shabbat, when government offices operate with minimal staff. The duty officer who received the signal followed protocol, flagging it as urgent and notifying the on-call supervisor. But the supervisor couldn't authorize extraction. That required approval from division leadership, and division leadership was unavailable until Saturday evening when Shabbat ended. The signal sat in the queue, marked urgent, waiting for someone with sufficient authority to make a decision. Daniel waited in his apartment, watching the street below, knowing that every hour increased the probability of arrest. Syrian Mukhabarat didn't move with urgency. They preferred methodical investigation, building cases thoroughly before making arrests. But that methodology provided only temporary protection. Once they decided to move, they moved decisively. Sunday morning arrived in Tel Aviv. Yosef Clean returned to the office and reviewed the weekend's urgent signals. He saw Daniel's emergency request and the duty officer's notation that Syrian intelligence was actively investigating. The situation had escalated exactly as the risk assessment had predicted might happen. Klein faced the decision he'd been deferring. Authorize extraction now, accepting all the risks and costs that entailed, or wait for more information, hoping that Syrian investigation wouldn't move faster than Mossad's decision-making process. He called a meeting with operations planning. They reviewed extraction scenarios again, updating them based on the increased urgency. The assessment was grim. Every hour of delay reduced the probability of successful extraction. But launching an operation on Sunday meant pulling together teams on minimal notice, coordinating with assets who might not be immediately available, and accepting higher risk of operational exposure. Klein made another decision. He would present the situation to the division director Monday morning with a recommendation to authorize extraction. But the final approval would have to come from the director. Daniel spent Sunday in his apartment, eating tinned food and watching Arabic news stations that reported nothing about arrests or counterintelligence operations. Silence was information, but he couldn't interpret what it meant. Were they still building their case? Had the shop owner's warning been enough to make them pause? Or were they simply waiting for the optimal moment to move? He checked his communication channel every hour. No new messages. The absence of communication became its own message. He was alone. Monday morning in Tel Aviv, Klein presented Daniel's case to the division director. He laid out the situation with clinical precision. Asset reporting active Syrian investigation. High probability of imminent arrest. Extraction possible but operationally complex. Resource allocation would require suspending other planned operations. Risk of exposure to additional assets if extraction failed. The director listened, asked questions, and made notes. He told Klein he would review the file and provide a decision by end of business day. That decision-making timeline, end of business day, became Daniel's death sentence. In Damascus, Syrian Mukhabarat had completed their investigation. Records showed Daniel Manzoor entering Syria in 2006 with documentation that, upon deeper scrutiny, contained inconsistencies. His business transactions, when examined closely, showed patterns suggesting they were cover rather than genuine commerce. Surveillance over the weekend had noted his failure to leave the apartment, his repeated checking of windows, the behavior of someone expecting arrest. The evidence was circumstantial but sufficient. At 10:15 Monday morning Damascus time, officers arrived at Daniel's apartment building. Daniel saw them from his window. 3 cars, 8 men in civilian clothes, moving with the purposeful coordination of professionals. He had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached his door. He considered the balcony, but his apartment was 6 floors up, and there was nowhere to go. He considered resistance, but he was unarmed and trained for intelligence collection, not combat. He sat on his couch and waited for the knock. They entered with practiced efficiency, weapons drawn, shouting commands in Arabic. Daniel raised his hands and said nothing. They searched the apartment. Finding the burner phone, the encrypted communications device hidden in a hollowed book, and a small notebook containing coded notations. The evidence confirmed what they'd suspected. He was a spy. They handcuffed him and led him down the stairs, while neighbors watched from doorways, their faces showing no surprise, only the wary recognition that this was how things worked in Damascus. Someone was always being arrested. In Tel Aviv, the division director made his decision at 4:45 Monday afternoon. After reviewing the operational costs and risks, he concluded that extraction was not justified. Daniel's intelligence value didn't warrant the resources and potential exposure required. The recommendation was to write him off as a lost asset and conduct damage assessment to determine what operations he might have compromised. The decision was documented in a memo using the sanitized language of bureaucracy. Asset deemed non-recoverable. Operational closet authorized. The message never reached Daniel. He was already in detention, being transported to a mukhabarat facility in Damascus, where he would be interrogated. The interrogations would last weeks. They would use methods refined over decades of Syrian intelligence work, combining psychological manipulation with physical pressure to extract information. Daniel would eventually break, as most people break when subjected to sustained interrogation by professionals who have time and institutional patience. He would reveal his contacts, his communication methods, the intelligence he'd collected. Not because he was weak, but because resistance has limits and Syrian interrogators understood how to find them. Mossad learned of Daniel's arrest through signals intelligence 3 days later. Intercepted communications between Syrian mukhabarat offices referenced the capture of an Israeli agent and the intelligence being extracted during interrogation. The reports were forwarded to damage control teams, who began assessing what networks and operations Daniel's confession might compromise. Other assets were quietly pulled back, communication channels were closed, planned operations were suspended. The machinery of intelligence work adapted to the loss, continuing forward as it always did, absorbing failures and moving to the next objective. Daniel Carmel died in Syrian custody in late November, 2 months after his arrest. The official cause was listed as heart failure, a common designation that covered multiple possibilities. He might have died during interrogation from injuries sustained. He might have been executed after providing all useful information. Or he might have actually suffered cardiac arrest from the sustained stress and physical deterioration of prolonged detention. Syrian authorities didn't release his body. They buried him in an unmarked grave in a cemetery outside Damascus, reserved for criminals and unidentified deceased. Israel never officially acknowledged his existence. Mossad's policy of neither confirming nor denying operations meant Daniel's family received no notification, no explanation, no closure. He simply disappeared, one of many who vanish in the invisible war between nations. His file was archived with the notation KIA, killed in action, though technically he'd been killed by inaction, by the cumulative effect of delays and risk calculations that prioritized operational security over one man's life. The aftermath revealed the bureaucratic architecture that had made his death inevitable. 7 different authorization layers had been involved in reviewing his extraction request. Each layer added time. Each review introduced new considerations. Each meeting delayed decision-making, while protecting the individuals involved from responsibility. No single person killed Daniel Carmel. The system killed him through the accumulated weight of process and procedure, through the transformation of urgent human crisis into bureaucratic problem-solving that moved at institutional pace while his time ran out. Within Mossad, Daniel's case became an internal review topic. Analysts examined the decision-making timeline, identifying points where different choices might have changed the outcome. The review concluded with recommendations for streamlining emergency extraction protocols and clarifying authority chains for time-sensitive decisions. But the fundamental tension remained unresolved. Intelligence operations require caution, verification, and careful resource allocation. Those requirements create processes that protect the organization but sometimes sacrifice the individuals who serve it. For the analysts who'd worked his case, Daniel's death registered as professional failure but not personal trauma. They'd followed procedures, made reasonable assessments based on available information, and recommended actions consistent with operational priorities. That the outcome was Daniel's death didn't invalidate the process. It merely demonstrated that sometimes intelligence work involves accepting losses. The language they used reflected this detachment. Non-recoverable asset, operational closure, acceptable attrition. Words that created distance between bureaucratic function and human consequence. Because once you see how this was done, The operation itself stops, being the important part. The truth that emerged from Daniel Carmel's death was darker than any assassination. It revealed a world where protective systems, designed to prevent mistakes, could themselves become mechanisms of destruction, where thoroughness becomes paralysis and caution becomes abandonment, where the machinery built to enable action sometimes ensures inaction, grinding forward with perfect procedural correctness while the person it was meant to protect runs out of time. Daniel's file remains classified, buried in archives accessible only to personnel with appropriate clearance. His name appears on no memorial. His sacrifice receives no recognition. He exists only as a case study, a lesson about the cost of institutional caution and the irreversible consequences when bureaucracy moves slower than danger. And in that invisibility lies the final cruelty. He didn't just die, he was erased. His existence denied so completely that even his death couldn't be acknowledged. What does waiting cost when someone's life depends on your decision?